Hello all, and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls Metroid Monday. And today we are tackling Metroid Prime 3's, we'll call it the second seed boss, the battle against the main boss Helios. Now, if you know Helios, or have been following this for any length of time, it is effectively the beginning of the last or third arc of the game. But before we get into that, here's our mission.
We are now ready to execute the final stage of our plan. Place the bomb in the cargo hold of the Spire pod, and then return here.
Alright, that's pretty simple, I guess. So, this part of the game I was initially kind of iffy about. There are aspects of this final, or this, I suppose, arc, that don't necessarily fit. Initially, I was thinking, oh yeah, just use a power bomb or some other tool that Samus has as a base level. The problem is that the clouds of Elysia are too thick, that most machinery would be torn to shreds by dropping below that level. So, getting to the Leviathan Seed is pretty difficult. In order to effectively reach it, we need to drop the Theronian bomb that we developed and processed in the last episode. This is effectively going to be our primary means of getting to the next major boss. But they didn't just stop at a, reasonable-ish boss in and of itself.
Now that the bomb is in place, return to the AU chamber so that we may discuss the final stage of our plan.
They went above and beyond with developing this game's next major boss, which is effectively allowing Samus to battle against the space pirates and allowing for a little bit more of an organic, shall we say, rivalry between the two. Samus needs to get the Spire pod above the Leviathan Seed, and they want to prevent it.
The Theronium bomb is primed and ready. Excellent work, Samus. To drop the bomb onto the Leviathan shield, you must move the bomb pod directly over the Leviathan and shut down the pod's engine. This must be done manually. This is a dangerous mission. Will you accept it? Thank you. Initiating Skytown migration. We will move the Skytown facility as close as possible to the Leviathan shield, and then deploy the bomb pod. Do you understand what you are supposed to do, Samus? After shutting off the engines, use the escape capsule to return here.
Skytown migration complete.
You must now proceed to the bomb pod. We will release the cables once you're in position. We regret this mission places you in mortal danger, but there are no other options. Good luck.
Okay. No other options aside, this is probably one of the best organic circumstances that come up. As I stated, Samus needs to get the pod, or the Spire pod, directly over top of its target. Samus needs to protect it during transportation. So you end up with this somewhat, I suppose, more dangerous circumstance that crops up as a direct result of it. That being that Samus needs to be alive, and the pod cannot be destroyed during transportation. This all makes sense. However, the circumstances surrounding it allow for a rather unique approach. I personally like this, and it really is a beautiful and somewhat dangerous cap-off to this arc of the game.
Samus, we are sensing a large number of enemy units in your vicinity. The pirates must have detected your movement toward the seed. If the spire is destroyed before reaching the impact site, all hope for Elysia is lost. You must defend the spire at all costs. Use everything in your power to ensure its safe passage. Good luck, Samus.
Yeah, that more or less sums everything up. Samus is stuck in a dangerous situation, again. And here we go. Now, where the first arc of the game was all about camaraderie, finding out who could be worked alongside during the initial interactions of the game, the Battle of Noria. Samus was effectively one of the cornerstones of that initial battle. The second battle was between Samus and the Brionian. Tech versus nature. And ironically, the third arc taking place over Elysia is tech versus tech. Well, more or less. It's human versus tech, shall we say. And I think that it makes the most sense when you look at it from the direction of the fact that Samus's camaraderie had effectively fallen apart as a direct result of what happened between Samus and her old partner, Ronda. The pair of them never wanted to have a falling out. The Phazon interaction caused a major change in Rundus's mentality that really did kind of put a damper on their relationship. But be that as it may, we end up in this arc being kind of the beginnings of the true battle between Samus and the pirates. Now, in Prime 1, the Space Pirates were an incredibly potent and consistent problem for Samus to face off against. In Prime 2, they were a footnote. A lesser evil, if we will. There was something else going on that needed to be dealt with in the form of the battle with the Ing. And again, this is kind of intentional. Prime 3 doubles down the duel between Samus and the Space Pirates by making each planet have a different interaction between them. With the first arc effectively beginning with the Space Pirate attack, and the final arc ending effectively with the Federation's retaliation. These two entities have always been at odds with each other in the Prime trilogy. I don't think there's very many people who would disagree with that statement. But what I can say for certain is that Prime 3's general approach to this issue is significantly more devastating than a lot of other approaches are. And in many ways, it actually reminds me of the battles between like the Master Chief and the Covenant in Halo. It begins with a battle where their version of the Galactic Federation, the UNSC, are effectively just trying to fight and protect their own, and the Covenant trying to find a way through said problems. But the wonderful thing is that At any point in time, they can update and change their relationship with one another. Now, if we are using something like Halo as a basis, there is a possibility that there might be entities within the space pirates
5 minutes
that
until
might
mission
actually
shutdown.
become friendly to Samus. Now, is that common for this franchise? Absolutely not.
Escape pod malfunction.
But
Opening
there is
repair
always
access
room
tunnel.
for growth and change within a franchise's, shall we say, its history and its characters. And I could reasonably foresee that there would be some level of potential growth between characters, becoming less hostile and more, shall we say, more positively invested with one another, as a general statement. Now, this doesn't have to be a perfect one-to-one relationship, but I do believe that there could be more room for potential growth and potential
Engine shutdown
building
in
up
4
of
minutes.
characters over time. All this is to say, we don't know what Prime 4 is going to bring. And positive or negative, we're going to end up with something entirely unique. Something that could potentially see Samus and the interactions with the world be tested in ways we as a fan base, we as a people, have yet to actually experience. And that's a good thing. That is something that I would love to see happen. I believe that we have
Pod online.
been lying dormant in some capacity for a while. That we have not exactly seen the full scope of what we could see from a character dissection perspective.
Engine shutdown in 3
So,
minutes.
I don't know. Maybe I'm making a mountain into a molehill. Maybe not. I don't know. Now, I want to mention a little something between all of this, and that is that up until this point, we've been focusing more heavily on the interactions between certain individuals in this game. Interactions between the various hunters, the interactions between them and between the hunters, between the Federation, the wonderful space pirates. Every single one of these groups have existed in some capacity for a reason. Yeah, no power bomb would be able to do that. But I think more than anything, there's needs to be a discussion about how this world would work towards or in the favor of one group or another. And in truth, I believe that Samus is
The plan worked. The bomb's impact resulted in the destruction of the Leviathan shield, and the seed is now exposed. Fly there and destroy it.
Samus has always been a peacekeeping entity. Her very actions, her very motivation has always kind of leaned into that. And I'm not opposed to that mentality that Samus is greater than the sum of her parts. That she could potentially be more. What I think has happened, however, to her character is that she becomes more. I suppose she's been a little bit of a flatlined character overall. That there are certain aspects that don't get explored because they don't necessarily mesh well with the version of the character we have seen before. Now, to iterate, this isn't that I'm saying that it's a bad thing. I am simply stating that it is something that I have noticed as an individual. Samus tends to be, I suppose, ignored in some capacity as far as what's kind of gonna be going on in her world as a whole. She has been depicted primarily as a protector, as someone who is stoic and resolute, somebody who is more than willing to do what needs to be done in order to achieve a goal. This is all fairly common for this character's, I suppose, what's the word? Depiction. But I believe that in many cases there's more to her than meets the eye. I believe that we often miss out on what could potentially be on a basis of we're too stuck on the past. Now, I'm gonna look at the game that most people generally dislike. And I apologize in advance for doing this. But Samus in Other M is depicted as somebody who is dealing with a lot. She's distracted, she's lost, she's hurt. She's looking towards a figure in her life that was a positive interaction for her, because she's burnt out. And why shouldn't she be? She literally just witnessed the death of the baby Metroid, which is in direct contrast to her instincts, shall we say. She's a protector. She witnessed the death of something she was trying to protect. That hurts on identity level. But also, she witnessed not only the loss of the baby Metroid, but the loss of her heritage. She was, for the majority of her life, raised on Zebes. If she was raised on Zebes and then witnessed its destruction in full, would you not be a little distracted or distraught as a direct result of that? To me, this belief that she is somehow infallible, that she is not human in spite of everything that goes on in her life, doesn't mesh well. Yes, she's distracted. I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. But there is so much more to what's going on than what's on the page. So, in this way, I believe we could potentially see a more, I don't want to say emotional version of Samus, but somebody who's a little more in tune with what's going on in her life in a positive and or negative light. She is not infallible and never will be. She is, however, a human being, and she is somebody who has been through more than her fair share. That's where I'm going to go with it. Anywho, Helios here is one of the is the second seed boss of the game. Second of 3. And if I'm being honest, Helios has always been rather forgettable. There's a possibility that Helios is in fact the last of the Elysians, something that is more akin to a living entity than a lot of seed bosses become, but is also something that is more, how do you say, it's more like a living entity than a lot of seed bosses end up being. But it is more robotic than the first one was. And what I think this hints at is that the seed requires something that is easy to manipulate to become the core. Now, in some cases, they use entities like Ridley or the, what was it called? Moginar? As the seed boss or seed entity to act as a defense mechanism against the core being destroyed. But honestly, there's not much more that is specified beyond that. It exists. The fact that Helios is almost equal parts machine and living entity means that now that it has a more stable fuel source, something that, according to the lore, was lacking, they struggle to be able to or how do I want to put it? For a while there was no stable fuel source for the entities that existed as the seed bosses, or as the Elysians. So, for a while, their best solution was to shut themselves down and wait. And in some regard, I don't deny that this was the best solution for them. However, best solution or not, it becoming a Phazon entity, or dependent on Phazon for its survival, means that Helios has effectively defected from its original purpose in order to protect this new entity, this new being, in the form of faith. Now, this is a little bit of a misnomer. I don't necessarily believe Helios is intentionally helping Faith, but rather that Helios is kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. If it cannot function to the positive role that it was aiming for prior to it shutting down, then it will find a new role. It is an AI system to a degree that was designed for research purposes, but also the upkeep and maintenance of the entirety of Skytown. If you end up with that type of role, and you can no longer fulfill it because of an energy crisis, which has been plaguing the land of Elysia for decades, then theoretically, it makes sense that it would defect to what can actually keep it going, allow it to finish the tasks that it was intended to complete long before the game began. Is this a little bit of a oversimplification? Yes. But it is nonetheless a relatively reasonable assessment to make. And with Helios defeated, the poison in Samus's veins deepens. I love this moment. The suit is changing. It's getting darker, more heavily fused with the power of Phazon altogether. Samus needs Phazon to be able to defeat Darkseid, but to lean too heavily into it is also a death sentence. To lean into it to a point where Samus will actually be able to defeat her rival means effectively giving in to the very power that she seeks to destroy. This is a terrifying prospect for the character. This is something that is also a very real concern. Because what happens if is a very notable problem. Anyway, we have unlocked the super missiles. Not super missiles, but the super missiles. And by unlocking this, we gain access to destroying the second seed altogether. Now, what I find interesting about the various seed bosses is that they're bug-like creatures, but they almost exist as I want to call it like a parasitic version of the Aurora units. They're similar enough to an Aurora unit to be comparable, but different enough to be considered totally different entities. In my mind, the seed boss, or the Leviathan seeds, are part of an entity that is far more dangerous and far more concerning than what came before. This, of course, leads to the major concern of where did the Phazon come from? And while I don't believe we ever get a true answer to that, we do get a fairly good look into what Phazon is within Prime 3.
Elysia is now free of further corruption, Samus. Both Leviathans have been removed from Federation space. You have once again performed admirably. However, the threat is not over. We received word from a reconnaissance unit that an emergency GF communication capsule has been found. Analysis has uncovered a message from Gandreda, sent while she was searching for the... This is her last message right before she disappeared. To our surprise, the message indicates that a Leviathan has also impacted the pirate homeworld, which suggests that pirates are now enhancing their military forces with Phazon. Worse, the corruption appears to be spreading very quickly. It's as if the planet itself is transforming into pure Phazon. Left unchecked, this corruption could spread to the entire galaxy. The time to act is now. You must destroy that Leviathan and stop the spread of further corruption. To that end, the Federation is planning a full-scale assault on the pirate homeworld. The attack will commence as soon as our preparations are complete. We have marked the location of the pirate homeworld on your map. And Samus, be on the lookout for Gandreda.
So, our mission is clear at this point. Infiltrate the space pirate homeworld and eradicate Phazon. That's about it. Be on the lookout for Gandreda. Now, Gandreda, we are pretty sure is, at this point, has followed the same pattern as Gore and Runda. The difference being is that fear of Gandreda is she could be anyone at any time, anywhere. And so, unlike the prior two, which were very clear entities, this one is very clearly a danger to everyone, including herself. Now, the beautiful thing about this particular area is that there's actually a lot of lore surrounding the Phazon as a whole. But that's a story for another day. Until next time, have a good one.